Steve Ray, Exit 425. It's where we live. After discussing certain situations in my vice principal's office with students, I would often tell them that I need them to be as successful as possible. I need them to make as much money as possible so that they'll pay taxes in the future. So that when I'm a really old guy, there will be a hospital there with doctors and nurses to take care of me. The sun is setting on the current education contracts for teachers and educational assistants across Ontario. The province is beginning to negotiate with those unions to try to settle those contracts before their deadline on August 31st. Who knows what lies before us in terms of what school is going to look like? Maybe it's as foggy as it is today. But in order for those students to be as successful as possible and for me to have the best hospital care in my very old age, we all need schools to be as effective as possible. Chris Clarke from the Kawartha Pine Ridge District School Board, OSSTF, the organization in Ontario that represents Ontario secondary school teachers, joins me today at Exit 425 to talk about teacher contracts and several other things that OSSTF is working on to make our education system the very best it can be for our students, to be as well prepared as possible for their future endeavors. Exit 425, it's where we live and where so many of our kids go to school dreaming of great things in their future. Today's guest at Exit 425.
In the main corridor of Exit 425.
Local politicians to connect with families.
What are some unique challenges?
Thanks very much, Steve, for having me.
Exit 425, it's where we live. It's my pleasure to welcome Chris Clarke, who's the president of OSSTF for Kawartha Pine Ridge District School Board. He represents the secondary school teachers in KPR. And we were going to have another guest, Richard McCormick, his colleague from the Durham District School Board. But unfortunately, Richard had some late notice meetings added to his schedule. So, but that doesn't take away from Chris. He's a great guest. And welcome back to Exit 425.
Thanks. I'll do my best without my emotional support, Richard, but we'll get through it.
He'll appreciate that comment. Chris, we're hearing a lot in the news about negotiations for new education contracts. They're getting underway. What is the process, and is it like a provincial thing and then a local thing?
So the School Board Collective Bargaining Act, which was enacted a number of rounds ago, it's clear as mud in terms of the public side of understanding how all the pieces work together, because there is actually two levels of bargaining that goes on, but there is only one notice to bargain that goes in. So the notice to bargain was served at the beginning of June by all of the education affiliates, but that was a process that also notified our local school boards that locally every single affiliate also wants to bargain. So the process from here will become kind of a parallel process that can exist at the same time. So we don't have to wait until a provincial deal is satisfied to start local bargaining. And in fact, we have actually already engaged with KPR in particular to start talking about what it looks like for us. But we can't really fully understand what the scope of the local bargaining looks like until the provincial level decides which issues are going to be handled centrally and which are going to be handled locally. So we call it the central local split is what we refer to it as. And so right now they've already had a couple of meetings between OSSTF and the provincial bodies for bargaining. And what they are working on right now is not settling anything, but just trying to decide what is theirs and what is going to be sent down to the locals to bargain.
It seems late to be starting negotiations that seldom go really smoothly for contracts that end on August 31st. What is Ontario in for this year, Chris?
I'd agree that it's late because truthfully, the education unions have told openly that they were willing to start bargaining as soon as the province was willing to start bargaining. Legally, you can't serve notice to bargain officially until a certain number of days before the end of your contract. So you can't demand to start bargaining any earlier than what they did. They served notice right at the very beginning of that threshold. But the province was unwilling to start any earlier, which they could have granted. Obviously, one as a local leader, I'm not on the central bargaining team, so I'm not involved in those sorts of deliberations. And the reality is that when we went through our last round of bargaining, it became very clear through the binding arbitration process that we did that there were certain issues that were allowed to be handled through an arbitrated pathway, and there were certain things that we were told very explicitly, this is for bargaining, it is not for arbitration. So there is going to be a more traditional round of bargaining to come in Ontario this year, and that comes with optimism in the sense that we wish to bargain and we wish to talk about the things that members talk about, and there's been clear mandates given through our bargaining surveys as to what those issues are. But it comes with the risk of what people's rights are in terms of right association and right to strike and right to job action and things of that nature. Obviously, one never hopes it comes to that, but I think that it's very clear that we are pushing forward with a mandate towards not just bargaining for improvements on working conditions, but for protecting public education as a whole.
When we were setting this interview up, I sent an article about school violence and the link with larger number of teacher absences. Last time we spoke, Chris, you spoke of how you advocate for school admin impacted by what is going on in schools. And I mean, I've heard it from my former colleagues as well. That being, even though you don't represent those school administrators, will this impact the contract negotiations?
Absolutely, and obviously using the term violence when we're talking about it being generated from a student is a tricky situation because violence comes with a label and violence comes with judgment. But at the same time, we are stuck with the definition under OSHA that force impressed upon a worker. That is how the Ministry of Labor considers it. And so there's been a clear mandate given through what people care about, the conversations I'm having with not just the members of my union, but obviously the members of the Ontario Principals Council, elementary teachers, QP education workers, such as in Durham, there's members of PSSP who are psychologists, speech and language, educational assistants. Those are all workers who deserve to be safe at work. And because of the defunding of education, we struggle to meet the needs of students who need they need support in order to access a meaningful education. And unfortunately, the injury and the lost time is a symptom of a system that is horribly defunded because we don't have the bodies that we need, and we are no longer as flexible to offer the unique services that those students need. So it absolutely will be on the table in terms of bargaining, not just for health and safety language around worker protections, but the realities of our classrooms, especially in a post-COVID era. We need better funding models. We need to be able to show up for kids the way that they deserve to be shown up for. And we need to be able to dynamically support workers with different working situations. This KISS can't be a teacher-driven bargaining lens. It actually is all workers, and that also includes the trickle-down effect that will come from our compatriots in groups like the principals and vice principals who aren't in a union, but will obviously, hopefully benefit from whatever it is that we can bargain.
Is the trustee thing over? We heard earlier in this year a lot about trustees and concerns that the minister and by extension the government have over the role of trustee because of the behavior of some trustees. Is that an issue now?
Well, again, the trustee model comes with pros and cons. I obviously don't like any system where there is no accountability whatsoever, which I do believe ultimately was the original goal of the Bill 33 and Bill 101 and all the changes that the Ford government put forward. They ultimately decided to back off and not enact it to the same degree, but they have still left a great number of school boards under supervision with no clear pathway to get out of supervision. And so the trustees to continue to exist. I don't know whether or not boundaries are going to change. I know that they have reconfigured that the trustees are no longer involved in central negotiations. Instead, a group called Code, which is a body of what used to be called directors of education, are now supporting the government's positions in terms of central bargaining. So the trustees have been eliminated from that space. But at the same time, they're still sitting around the table. They're still talking about school board policies. They're still working through those things, but their votes are mostly ceremonial. When it comes to, I watched it happen in my own district where they were debating the budget and talking about what needs to come off the table in order to become compliant because of the defunding that has gone on. And ultimately, the trustees were saying things out loud like, if we don't vote for this, it doesn't matter. It makes no sense for us to do anything other than to give the thumbs up and be confident that our people have done a thorough job. Because if we push back on this, it's just going to get approved by the Ministry of Education anyway. So their votes are ceremonial. At least it's another set of consultation, because really it's a consultation now instead of a vote. So the trustee thing is going to disappear in terms of a front issue, and their role is now consultation rather than government.
Wow. That's been a role that's been full of passion for the people who have filled it and sought that role in elections. A passion
And there'll still
for
be trustees. There'll still be trustee elections. But again, I think that we have to change our mindset that they are simply there to help consult on issues that matter. There's still a pathway to give feedback, but they do not really have a vote in the same way anymore.
different passion, I guess, then, right? Right now, the Durham District School Board, the board that I work for, and the KPRDSB are in the throes of finding new directors or CEOs. Will that affect negotiations at all?
I mean, in terms of, again, the two levels of negotiations, it can have impacts in different spaces. So it's interesting that right in the middle of figuring out what does this new CEO, who would be the director, and then the new CEDO, who would be an associate director or a number two, those are the new titles. Those are the people who are supposed to be members of Code, which is supposed to be at the central bargaining table in support of the government's position. So you have a few directorships that are changing hands. Rita Russo is retiring from our board, and Camille is retiring from the Durham District School Board. I think at the end of the year. It's not going to impact local bargaining because those folks are not at the table locally. There tends to be different negotiators and different people involved in that. But in terms of the unknown status as to school boards that are under supervision and school boards that are going through directors changes, I don't know what the impact is on the code level, but I have heard that most of the supervisors that have been appointed by this Ministry of Education are very directly involved in central negotiations. So instead of allowing the people with authentic relationships, again, no love or loss, depending on your perspective in terms of, you're the top CEO in your own district, about whether or not you trust them to advocate strongly for what you care about. By putting the supervisors in the central bargaining space, the clear message is that this is, again, about consolidation and control, because those are people that are not actually thinking about anything other than clearly what the singular consolidated power position is of Calandra and Ford. So it's going to impact central bargaining for sure in terms of this change. Locally, it probably will not change a lot.
Steve Rax at 425. It's where we live. After discussing certain situations in my vice principal's office with students, I would often tell them that I need them to be as successful as possible. I need them to make as much money as possible so that they'll pay taxes in the future. So that when I'm a really old guy, there will be a hospital there with doctors and nurses to take care of me. We might be looking at a fairly brand new day right now, but in reality, the sun is setting on the current education contracts for teachers and educational assistants across Ontario. Today is a relatively new day. We might be It's pretty foggy in behind me. In reality, the sun is setting on the current education contracts for teachers and educational assistants across Ontario. The province is beginning to negotiate with those unions to try to settle those contracts before their deadline on August 31st. Who knows what lies before us in terms of what school is going to look like? Maybe it's as foggy as it is today. But in order for those students to be as successful as possible and for me to have the best hospital care in my very old age, we all need schools to be as effective as possible. Chris Clarke from the Kawartha Pine Ridge District School Board, OSSTF, the organization in Ontario that represents Ontario secondary school teachers, joins me today at Exit 425 to talk about teacher contracts and several other things that OSSTF is working on to make our education system the very best it can be for our students to be as well prepared as possible for their future endeavors. Exit 425, it's where we live and where so many of our kids go to school dreaming of great things in their future. We might be looking at a new day right now, but Chris, you talked about and have used the term CEO in terms of the role of the director, and that's a clear change in the organizational nomenclature, at least the naming of the different roles. Is there any talk of any other kind of change in the structure of the organization in a school board? We've renamed the director to CEO, the associate directors to
CEDO.
CEDO, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
And what about like superintendents, the senior management? Any changes there?
Not really. And ironically enough, the one district that we've already seen a directorship change in this one is Thames Valley, which is actually one of the school boards that is already under supervision. And the person that they appointed to as their new CEO, former director, is not some business magnate, business administration person, from what I can tell. It would actually be somebody who would be a traditional director who came up through the education ranks and all that. So ultimately, I mean, the proof will be in the pudding in terms of who ends up getting hired into these positions. But I actually think that despite what the law would appear and the messaging would appear about how we're putting in these business people and financial wizards and all these other things, I actually don't think that's what's going to happen. I really think that you're going to see traditional educator pathway folks mostly ending up in these new CEO positions, at least in the short term, because that's the pool. Like that's who's invested in it. You're not suddenly going to find people wanting to transition from the private industry into these positions. There is already a tradition of every school board having one or multiple, what we would call sort of corporate superintendents, people who deal with things like contracts with busing companies and working with contractors and purchasing and all that. Those are traditionally people who aren't coming up through the teacher ranks and ending up in those positions. So we have these people already working in school boards. So some of those people will probably end up being directors now that some of the rules have been loosened about what superintendency roles people with non-teaching backgrounds can do. But I don't think it's going to happen suddenly. So in KPR, I fully expect that there'll be some internal candidates that will apply. There'll be some external candidates that apply, and so on. And we have been informed of some reconfigurations internal to KPR, but it still looks entirely familiar as a school board in terms of superintendencies and all that, with the exception of the accountability office is going to be a thing,
Right.
which was part of the mandate that came out. But it is run by somebody who is already essentially doing that same work, who was an executive officer superintendent already. So no major changes expected. I don't think anybody will notice.
So, and there's comfort in not being forced to notice about something, right? So that adds some stability for families and for teachers rather, right? So that's good. A 2 or 3 year deal could prove to be a political hot potato for the Conservative government, depending on when the next election is called, or for a new government, if the polls for the premier are any indication at this point, which the middle of a term doesn't matter. What sort of term do you think is most likely to be secured at the table this go round?
I'm going to give you a wishy-washy answer on this because I think it all depends. I think every possible outcome is on the table here right now, right? We've seen the embarrassing, horrible things that Danielle Smith has done in Alberta in terms of using the notwithstanding clause and forcing lengthy contracts onto people. Not only that, but I mean, if you really look at the optics of what she did, she let these people go out on strike for a number of weeks in order to bank a whole bunch of money, saved salaries and all that sort of stuff, and then force them on back anyway, right? So it's Doug Ford could do that. I think that it would be politically damaging to him to do that based on the polls that you referenced, that's not, the public is sending a very clear message through all the things that this is not what they want from him. And he has been shown as a premier who will bend based on what those polls tell him. He has great, and again, far be it for me to compliment Doug Ford. He is an excellent politician. He is good at making those pivots and figuring out how to populist his way through these issues sometimes. So we could end up with actually a settled negotiated deal that we find some middle ground on it because he realizes, as you said, there's a political hot potato here. But do we get a 3-year deal because of it to try to get him to the other side of an election? Probably. Like, that's what I think he would probably want. If things are going exceedingly badly and they decide that they want trench warfare, we could see legislation, we could see notwithstanding, we could see all kinds of things, and I think the deals only get longer from there. So I don't have a good educated guess. I don't. But all I know is that he will want whatever deal that he gets to extend beyond an election, because this is, as you say, has the potential to damage his relationship with parents and families. And he does not want that.
Well, and if you believe what he says in the media and what his minister says, the whole goal is to make it better for families and students, right? And make sure that everything's ready to rock and roll so that the school year is never interrupted. There was the pre-negotiation deal last time about our binding arbitration in order to avoid strikes. And, if that's his goal, then it'll be interesting to see what he does to manifest that goal. And
Right. But binding arbitration outside of settling what any sort of salary increases look like is not going to be a viable pathway, in particular for OSSTF. People may not realize that OSSTF represents about a 50-50 split now between teachers and education workers. And the binding arbitrated pathway greatly injured education workers. The outcome that they got from that process was not acceptable. And the salary benefits that somebody like me got was on the backs of them. And that's not something that OSSTF is going to be able to absorb this time. And Kaplan, who was our arbitrator, very clearly articulated that binding arbitration is not a pathway towards workplace improvements. We can talk about salary, but we're not going to talk about sick leave or health and safety or temperature in buildings or even class sizes. The new D-stream pathway at this point, the only reason why we have any class size understandings in that is because of handshake deals we have with our school boards. So if we actually want to negotiate what a reasonable class size is for your D-stream classes, which again are supposed to be good for kids, we can't use arbitration. We have to negotiate it. So that means that we are going to go through this more traditional pathway this time in order to get those things for kids and for workers.
It sounds like our teachers' unions, and I spent the last 15 years of my education career in management, but with the full respect of and for the union members that I worked with, because I saw what they did every day, and I had a lot of influence on how their days turned out, just on a day-to-day basis. So a great deal of respect for that. And I appreciate that the union has this holistic approach to education, and you're trying to make the whole system better through these negotiations. It's really the one really strong avenue for being able to do that, which is pretty awesome. But I don't think people fully understand. They think that you're just working at getting a better salary and more vacation days.
I mean, that's again to the credit of a conservative government that's very good at comms and very good at the things that they do. And I appreciate the fact that a podcast like yourself, big, small, or in the middle, are willing to talk to people and talk about the fact that we are trying to find as many common good pathways as we can, because we care greatly. Every educator would not do the work that they do if they didn't care about the students that were in front of them. And we have watched, despite all of the rhetoric from Calandra and every minister of education before that saying, we've never invested more in kids. There's billions of dollars missing from the education budgets of Ontario. You need to simply go and take a look at all of your local leaders, whatever district you might be in, to find out how few educational assistants exist now in our school board, how our buildings are struggling to maintain their temperature whenever the slightest bit of a heat wave goes up, right? The system is struggling. And every symptom that you hear about in terms of workplace violence, in terms of attendance and engagement and all that stuff, it is a symptom of a system that is struggling. And it is struggling from a government that's been in control of it for almost 10 years and would love to blame governments from 10 years ago that's the reason why we have troubles. This is their house, and we're just trying to do our best to make it better.
It sounds like a busy time and a full summer for you. A lot of your colleagues, the people that you represent, are nearing the end of their school year and will pack their books away and close their computers for a little while, and we'll get some rest. Will you be able to get some rest or vacation time?
Last thing I'm going to do is try to exhibit any sort of sympathy for how busy we are, because that is a losing argument for anybody in this line of work. I will do my best to disconnect. People who do union released work have a slightly different schedule than our colleagues in the classroom. They need all the time to recharge because they give them their full emotional weight for long periods of time, and they need to spend some time to recharge. But there will be lots of people that will be taking additional qualifications over the summer. There's lots of people who are thinking about what's next in their career. And of course, because only Doug Ford and Paul Calandra would do this, they released the updates to the Growing Success Assessment Policy in the last week of school. And so most teachers are now spending their time thinking about, well, I guess I can't do my exams next year the way I thought I would. And no, I can't do my culminating task the way I think it is, So the work will continue in ebbs and flows over the summer. Teachers never completely disconnect, despite the fact that they should, because everyone has a right to disconnect. But the work will continue, and we here doing union work need to think about how to ramp people up and get people ready for the bargaining round to come in the fall.
How can people learn more about policy and life and education from a teacher's perspective? I'm suggesting one would be osstf.on.ca. Any other ideas?
Obviously the provincial websites for various teaching unions, they're often designed for members of the union. They're not always meant as a conduit for public relationships. Social media is perhaps much more akin for those interactions. So obviously there's an OSSTF Facebook, Instagram, and all that. But there's two things in particular that I'd like to draw everyone's attention to. One is a website called underfunded.ca. It is the campaign run by OSSTF specifically about our bargaining round to come and the impacts in some of those groups that you don't realize that we represent. Stories about custodians and psychologists and education workers, our university sector. I don't know if people realize that we actually represent a great number of workers that work at university campuses all over, which is also being ridiculously underfunded and unsupported by this government. And they are actually on a different bargaining pathway, and some of those bargaining rounds are contentious in this moment right now. So that's one pathway, is underfunded.ca. The second is, over my shoulder, there's this sign that says Together for Publicly Funded Education. You may start seeing them in the public. We have been distributing lawn signs and other spaces. It's a commitment between all of the major education unions, including CUPE, ETFO, OECTA, AEFO, and us, to basically hold each other accountable and hold each other to some common goals around what this round of bargaining looks like. So the red is to represent the red for education, and the purple is representative for the education workers. CUPE in particular uses that color. And so anybody who's displaying that sign is obviously saying that we're in it for the greater good of what public education brings to the people of Ontario, but also that Labour is trying to do their best to make things right in a government that has been hostile towards what public education represents. So obviously, if one is interested in a sign, we might have a few. So anybody's more than welcome to reach out, and we're happy to pass those along. But any engagement in any of our platforms would be greatly appreciated, and an opportunity to sign a petition or sign for a letter campaign in any of those spaces would be a great way to learn more about what's actually going on behind the scenes.
Wow, what a great way to finish for today. Chris, Clarke, thank you very much for taking your time to join me here at Exit 425 and to share your thoughts about some of these questions that people have, including the most recent announcements by the provincial government.
All right. Thank you very much for having me as always. And please do not hesitate to email any of your local unions to find out more about what's going on.
Awesome. And a shout out to Richard McCormick, who's out there and will probably be watching this to see how his name gets mentioned.
It's okay. It's okay. We did all right without him. Not as good, but pretty close.
Awesome. Thank you so much.